So this is what we're making. A forged 8-sided ring with an opal triplet with a pre-made bezel setting. So the ring that I'm making has 17.7 inside diameter, and the thickness of the wire is going to end up being 1.5. So that's 19.2 times 3.14. So 5952, 60 millimeters, and I'm using 3 millimeter round wire, and I'm going to forge it. So as I forge it, it's going to get bigger. So I'm going to make it about 6 millimeters smaller than the length that it should be if I were just going to cut it and solder it together, round it up, and that would be it. Because I want to be able to hammer some pretty good flats on it, and I want it to be able to expand to size. So I'm going to cut it 54 millimeters long. And we'll just saw that. This is a 3/0 saw blade. Now this wire is pretty hard, so I'm going to have to anneal it. But first, going to file both ends flat, and it's easier to file before it's annealed. Metal is always easier to file or cut, saw, if it's not annealed. Annealing it makes it soft. So now I'm just going to anneal this. So I've got it sitting on my charcoal block. Using my Smith's mini torch, little torch. And we just heat it from end to end until it's a dull red. Which means if you can see red at all, it's red enough. So there. Quench it in water and dry it off. You didn't see me do that. Normally I would use my flat half-round pliers to do this, but I have a Pepe ring bender, and 3 millimeters in diameter and that long is pretty tough to get into a circle, so I'm going to use the ring bender. Now I've got the steel round mandrel out here, and I've got a nylon pusher, and the nylon holds it so that you can push it. Now I'm just going to take my rawhide hammer and tap this sideways, tap the ends down, and finish forming it. And if you just hold it on wood to hammer on it, and if you hammer with your rawhide hammer, it'll form it, but it won't damage the metal. Now, you can probably see that the two ends are touching on the inside, and I've got this V-shaped gap on the top. So what I'm going to do is just hold this sideways on my bench, saw through the join, and then I'm going to take my ring bending pliers, and these pliers have a nylon V on the outside, and the metal pusher, and that way what you do is when you squeeze it there, it'll bring these ends together, but the nylon will keep it from damaging the ring. A couple little marks on the inside, we don't mind. So we just keep doing that, sawing and then bringing it back together. Until we have a perfect join. It was a pretty good gap, and it'll probably take a few times for it to be perfect. But you can see it's already starting to come together. So once we have it so that it's a perfect join, then we'll solder it. So that's what I wanted. The two ends together and level and ready to solder. So I have the joint up in my third hand. There's a 2 millimeter long piece of hard solder. Mix up the flux, make sure it's nice and creamy. Flux the join. So a medium flame on our little torch. You can use any torch for this one, it doesn't matter. Heat the solder pick red, keep it red, touch your solder. Heat the join from underneath. And you can see I have the solder perched over here. Now once your flux goes clear, touch your solder to the join, and the solder will flow. And the fact that we put the solder here and the flame down here, the solder will flow towards the flame. So now we'll just quench this and pickle it. So we're out of the pickle. Rinse it, dry it, have a look at your solder joints, make sure that you can see the meniscus everywhere, which is the curve in the solder between the two bits of metal. And that looks pretty good. Then we're just going to go on our ring mandrel and round it up. Now if you go to put it on your mandrel and it doesn't go, just take your rawhide hammer, sit it vertically like that on your wooden block, tap it, and it will expand the ring. Like that. And then once it goes on, then you just start rounding it up with your rawhide hammer. And I always pull it down with my finger as I'm hammering and turning. And you can see that it's getting around fairly quickly. So just keep working until it's round. Now, it has a bit of a potato chip shape to it. So what we're going to do is just take 2 steel blocks and sandwich it between them. Give it a good smack. And now it's nice and flat. So at this point, I'm using 400 wet or dry sandpaper on a sanding stick. And I'm going to tidy up the solder joint. And because I spent a fair amount of time getting the joint nice and tight and lined up, it doesn't take long to make it a really nice joint. So that's the outside. The inside, I'm just going to use a split mandrel on my handpiece with 400 grade paper. And same thing, it's just a small amount to clean up because it was a good join. And the better the join, the quicker your cleanup will be. So now 800 grade paper, and we'll stop. So I have my 800 paper on a different shaped stick, so I don't have to search for the number. I know that this is 800 and the other one is 400. Now I want to hammer this at 4 points. So I'm going to mark where the solder joint is, and then just north, south, east, west. You could put it on an index circle, but really 4 points is pretty easy to get an equal amount in between them. This doesn't have to be perfect, and what we're going to do is go on our ring mandrel, and the points are where I'm going to hammer. And I'm just going to take a planishing hammer and use the flat side, and I'm going to just hammer at those points. And because it's easier, I'll put this on my vertical vise to hold it. So I've got my Sharpie marks here. And it's quite easy to just hammer where the mark is. And we want a nice flat spot. Turn it, do the next one. Now as we hammer it, this will be getting bigger. Now this is thick material, and we have quite a ways to hammer it because we started with 3 millimeter diameter, and I want to hammer until it's 1.5 millimeters high. So we just keep working it. When it quits working, we'll anneal. and then come back and do it again. So you can see it's pretty square. Now I'm going to hammer in between the marks just for aesthetics. It doesn't have to be as thin, but it can be. So we end up like this. So we just keep working. And we pay attention to our size. So I've marked the size with the texture. We just don't want to go past that spot. So I'm really close to the size. Most of the flats are about 1.5 millimeter high. Now, as I was hammering, when I came to where the solder joint was, it was good everywhere except right on the very side it started to split. So what I'm going to do is anneal this. Once it's annealed, I'll cut through with the saw and re-solder this. And the reason I'm annealing it first is if I don't, it'll spring open. So if we anneal it first, it'll stay closed and it'll be easy to solder. So I saw through the same way we did before. Hold the ring sideways, and we're going to saw exactly on the solder joint. And when you're sawing, keep the ring squeezed shut. Squeeze it, hold it together, and saw through again. And if you don't keep it squeezed together, the saw blade will just push it apart. Now, the only gap is from the saw blade, so we'll just take our ring bending pliers, go opposite the solder joint, give it a little squeeze, and it'll come together to a perfect joint. So we'll solder it again. Perfect. So joint up, once again, I fluxed it, put a 2 millimeter long piece of hard solder on top. And once again, I'm heating from underneath. The flux has gone clear, and the solder flowed. And then I switch to the other side and I do it again, just to make sure that the solder flowed everywhere. Quench it, pickle it, and tidy up your joint. So I've tidied up the joint, and now we can go back on the ring mandrel and finish this. It won't take much, and we're just hammering to size at this point. So I only need to go one size, and we're still using the flat side of the hammer, and we'll just go turn it so that your marks aren't underneath the ring where you're hammering. And I'm now at the mark, so that's the size. Turn the ring around and just tap it at each spot. We're not trying to make it any bigger, we're just trying to make sure it's not tapered. Done. Then I'm going to solder a bezel, a pre-made die stamped bezel. Opposite the solder join, and by hammering this, by forging this, it actually made it the correct size for a 4x6 bezel. So all I'm going to do is melt a little bit of solder here, flux this, flow the solder, and it'll be done. So I've got the base up, we flux the base, flux the flat where it's going to go, and once again I'm using a 2mm long piece of solder. It's a fair amount of solder, but we want to make sure that there's plenty. And if there's an excess, all it'll do is make a nice rounded spot, meniscus, between the cup and the ring. So all I'm going to do is heat the base until the solder just starts to flow. There. Warm this up until the flux dries out. And now I'm just going to sit that on the ring. Push it in position. Get it exactly where I want it. So once again, take your time on this. And heating from underneath. And now we'll quench it. Have a quick look. And you should be able to see the curve of the solder between the setting and the ring. Normally you have to pickle it first, but this is fairly clean and I can see it. So now we'll just pickle this and polish it, and then we'll set the stone. We're out of the pickle. Everything looks lovely, just the way I want it. So now I'm going to put it in the tumbler to polish it up. So here we are out of the tumbler, ready to set the stone. I'm going to use the GRS ring clamp for this. It has leather jaws. Actually, it has plastic jaws. And the nice thing is it just slips in place. And we just drop that down in there. Tighten the bottom. Now, I normally don't use pre-made settings. I normally make my own. But from time to time, these pre-made settings are handy. It's calibrated. It's called a calibrated setting, which means that if you use that and a calibrated stone, they always fit together. So you can see it fits this bezel perfectly. So what I'm going to do now, take that out, And I'm going to sand the top edge of this. Now, this bezel setting is sterling. I usually prefer fine silver because it's easier to work and it doesn't tarnish as much. But of all of these pre-made stamped settings, I've only ever found them in sterling. So when they stamp it, it leaves kind of a sharp edge on the top. So I prefer to just sand that back a little. And that way it's not quite so sharp, and it gives you a nicer edge when you push it over. So now I'm going to mix up a little bit of 2-part epoxy glue and just put a tiny dab in the bottom. And what will happen is that will waterproof that. Now, a triplet is 3 layers. It's a glass bottom with a layer of opal and a clear crystal top. And by putting a little dab of glue in the bottom, it kind of waterproofs those 3 layers. They are glued together, but I like having a little bit of extra insurance. So I've mixed up my glue, and that's all I'm going to put in, just that little spot in the bottom. Then I'll drop the triplet back into place, and I'm just going to use a bezel rocker. So in the beginning, I just push a little spot on each side, and that's just to make sure that it holds that down flat against the bottom. So now at a 45-degree angle, I'm just going to work my way around. And then around again at a little steeper angle. I mean, I can feel it, see whether there are any bits standing up. It actually feels quite good, but I'm going to now go around it using my burnisher. So just right on the top edge, and I'm bracing this thumb against the top of the ring clamp, so I have some control. I don't use these ring clamps very much, but it's handy for something like this. So you can see I'm turning it as I'm burnishing. It just makes the work easier because it turns this way, and it makes it really easy. Like I say, I don't use it much, but when you do decide to hold a ring and work on it, it's quite handy. So that's finished. So there it is. our forged 8-sided ring with an opal triplet.